When has Israel ever been benevolent towards Lebanon or sought a desire to partner with Lebanon or help it grow? It's never been the case because that's not what colonizers do. And so fundamentally, there is a lack of understanding, not just in the Lebanese government, but the political parties that are supporting this position and are pushing for this position to disarm Hezbollah and disarm the South, that just seems to not grasp the gravity and the actuality of what Israel represents. It is not here to sit in its tiny corner and be, okay, let's be friends, let's integrate with the rest of the region, let's open our borders, let's have an EU-like economy with the rest of the Arab world. They're not here for that. And they've made that abundantly clear with the genocide in Gaza right now, right? And the genocide they want to commit in South Lebanon. They have made it abundantly clear they do not see us as equals. We are the human animals. It's come out of their mouth. They don't separate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Lebanese in South Lebanon, the Lebanese in Mount Lebanon. We are all human animals in their eyes. They are here to colonize. They're here to expand.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is Dispatches. For decades, Israel's strategy has been to weaken the states around it, splintering societies, fueling division, and leaving people too vulnerable to support the Palestinian struggle against colonialism. From Palestine to Syria to Lebanon, we can see how this project is playing out today. If Israel and its backers have a clear vision for the region, what's missing on the other side is a vision for the Levant rooted in sovereignty and independence. To help unpack this, I'm joined by Antoun Issa, co-founder of DeepCut News, to talk about U.S. and Israeli goals in the region, the threats the region faces, and what a real alternative might look like. But before we jump into it, this is just part of this episode. The full interview is available to Breakthrough News members only. You can become a member at patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And as always, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so you get a notification whenever we post new content. And if you appreciate this show, you can also donate below on YouTube. All right, Antoun. So we're adding this to the episode because literally like yesterday, 5 hours, 4 hours, something like that after we recorded an episode all about the region and all about Israel's insanity, Israel upped the ante again, this time by shockingly bombing Doha in Qatar to assassinate a Hamas official, specifically the Hamas negotiating team. This is the first time the Israelis have bombed a GCC state. Up until yesterday, I think we all were under the impression that these states were off limits. The Israelis would never touch them, even if there was Palestinian officials there, Hamas officials specifically. But as we've seen over the last 2 years, Israel will just cross every line that exists if you let it. And now I imagine that all the GCC states, even those that aren't exactly fond of Qatar or Hamas or anything Muslim Brotherhood aligned like Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, I would love to be a fly on the wall for those phone calls because, they're sitting there thinking to themselves, holy crap, like if Israel gets upset at any point in the future, this is just how they're going to handle it now. Like, would they be willing to do this to us? So anyways, I'm just going to throw it to you because we can't have an episode about the region and Israel's intentions without talking about this pretty explosive development.
No, it's a huge development, precisely because I think the Gulf states have always seen themselves and felt kind of insulated, I think, from the rest of the region with how it kind of engaged with Israel and thought because of their close ties to the US, Qatar hosts the largest US base in the region, it would be enough to deter anyone from attacking Qatar. But as we've seen, that is no longer the case. Just being, offering Trump a $400 million jet is not going to secure your country, right? So it's a huge development and it's going to require, I think, Qatar, like importantly so, to start reassessing its own foreign policy and how it goes about things. It's a small emirate. It sits on vast volumes of gas reserves. It is unbelievably wealthy, but it doesn't have the material power of larger nation states. It doesn't have a large population. It doesn't have a large military. And so it's always going to be a small player regardless of the wealth that it has. And as a result, it's got to play geopolitics, cleverly. And I think Qataris convinced themselves that they had been doing that, right? So, we've got the American base here, that's going to protect us. We have good ties to the Iranians. We have good ties to everyone. We talk to everyone. We talk to Hamas. We talk to the Israelis. We get along with the Turks really well. We like everyone. And so I don't think that's working for them anymore, as we can see, right? So trying to be the middleman without actually having a vision for the region and following through on that vision, it hasn't really worked for Qatar now, right? So I think it needs to reassess how it goes about its business in the region. But then broadly, in a more broader, speak up with that one, and more broadly speaking, for the GCC and the Gulf states, they also need to kind of have a bit of a wake up in terms of what they think Israel is. We spoke yesterday from a Lebanese perspective how we think, I think that, certain pockets of Lebanon just don't grasp what Israel is, right? And the extent it will go to assert its dominance, to assert its hegemony. And also just take into consideration that this is a settler colonial entity. It's a fascist entity that views all Arabs as human animals. It has no respect, whether you're a Palestinian in Gaza, whether you're a Lebanese in South Lebanon, or whether you're a Qatari in Doha. They have no respect for you as a human being. This notion that you can deal with Israel as a rational entity, it just needs to be discarded in the thinking of Arab leaders, because you can't. They're not rational thinkers. This is not a rational state that you're dealing with. Even if you replace Netanyahu with someone else, none of them are any better, right? They have it is a Jewish supremacist state. It runs on supremacist ideology. It's an extreme state. And if we come to terms with that, and if Qatari foreign policy thinkers sit now in Doha and are like, okay, maybe we've got to start dealing with Israel the way Israel actually is, an extremist, fascist, Jewish supremacist, bent on expansionism in the region, bent on hegemony at all costs, then we might reassess how we view this state and also consider it as a significant threat to our own interests. And if you start thinking in terms of, if you start seeing Israel in that light, all of a sudden your policy decisions start to change, right? So maybe Qatar might think about, improving its relations with Palestinian groups. Maybe it might think about how it's engaging in Syria, right? So it's one of the key backers behind the Shara regime. Okay, you've given them a lot of money to get to where they are in Damascus. It's a little card that you have in your pocket at the moment in the region. What are you going to do with that card? It's right on Israel's border. So, the Gulf states have to start reassessing, right? This isn't just something they can pretend exists elsewhere in the region. Oh, it's playing out in Lebanon. It's playing out in Palestine. What do we care? We'll throw a few billions here and there when reconstruction happens, and we'll host some talks. It's no longer the case. The Israelis are dragging them into the mud, right? So what are they going to do about it? And this comes to what we were talking about yesterday after the attack on the Tunisian waters. What are the Arabs going to do about it? And we are at a point in history where the Gulf Arab states pretty much sit on top of the Arab world. It's not Egypt. It's not Iraq like it used to be. It's Saudi Arabia. It's UAE. It's Qatar. These three powerful, extremely wealthy, Gulf-rich states sit on top of the Arab world. And so they have to make a decision now. Are they going to lead the Arab world against this expansionist entity that threatens the entire region, not just Palestine, not just Lebanon, not just Syria, but threatens them and their security as well? Or they're going to sit back and hope Trump comes to save them, because I don't think that's a smart policy.
No, and it really does seem like a few things here. It does seem as though we've entered a world already, we have entered a world where the US, with Israel as its sort of, tip of its spear, desires or wants to see a world where it can dominate with brute force, and everything is unconditional surrender. There's no compromise, there's no diplomacy, there's no negotiation. It's basically just a kind of slave and master situation, right? With different levels of like just how much of a slave you have to be. And I think that this demonstrates that even being a U.S. ally or a U.S. vassal state that hosts CENTCOM, right, or hosts massive U.S. military bases and U.S. troops does not give you the protection you think it gives you, right? It doesn't. Just because you host CENTCOM, that's what Qatar does, it basically hosts CENTCOM, doesn't mean that you are protected from Israel literally bombing your capital. And today it's Hamas, right? Today it's Israel upset because it's not getting what it wants in Gaza. But tomorrow, what's it going to be? Maybe Israel's unhappy about an economic trade deal and not getting their way. Why not just bomb Riyadh? Or like, I mean, I know that sounds a bit extreme, but, if you asked me 2 days ago, would Israel bomb Doha? I'd say that, no, that's insane. And, furthermore, I think it's interesting to consider the fact that, another place that hosts Hamas officials is Turkey. I think there's a reason Israel chose to do this in Doha instead of Istanbul. I think there may be more repercussions had Israel done something like this in Istanbul, because Turkey, actually knows how to fight a war and has pretty decent weapons. But all that's to say, if I was Turkey, I'd be sitting there being like, okay. And also, let's not forget, Turkey is crucial to Israel having an oil supply. So anyway, if you want to add anything to that, go ahead.
Yeah, well, the attacks in Syria the other day, allegedly, reportedly, from reports on the ground, targeted Turkish military assets that they had provided to the Syrians. So, the Turks are already being targeted in one way or another by Israel. Israel's actions in Syria are largely about keeping Turkey out. So, Turkey is a whole nother story, right? Turkey does have the capabilities. It's a huge nation. It's got a capable army. It's a capable military force. It can respond. It's like Iran. It's a big power of the region, and doesn't require, American, I guess, overlordship to kind of govern its affairs, even though it is in NATO. Is Turkey going to continue being a bystander, watching the entire region, I guess, unravel under Israeli kind of brutality? Or is it going to start throwing some muscle in? And that's, Turkey is one of those players that can make an impact if it does decide to kind of get involved. It hosts Hamas. It talks the talk on Palestine. Is it going to actually start giving support to the Palestinians? Because no one has given them any support. If you go back to the 60s and 50s, Governor Abdel Nasser gave weapons to the PLO, and so did Muammar Gaddafi. And, we know that Assad and Saddam Hussein had their various Palestinian factions that were, they exploited. But Arab regimes gave weapons to the Palestinians to lead the resistance struggle. And it was the same with the Lebanese resistance in the 80s. It's not unusual. It was normal for Arab regimes to support resistance groups fighting Israel. No one is giving the Palestinians any support at the moment. So that is a lever that Turkey and Qatar, we know that because they played this game in Syria, right, against the Assad regime. They know how to fund groups and cause mayhem. Why are they not causing mayhem against Israel? What is stopping them?
Right.
What are they afraid of? Right. So and that is a lever they have at their disposal. It's not just the Iranians who can do that. But also, I think a lot of this also draws attention to the Trump administration, Donald Trump, and how I think the various players in the region viewed him and thought they could engage with him to pacify him or appease him. There was a lot of kind of like, oh, if we make Trump feel good, if we give him a whole bunch of compliments, if we give him some gifts and presents, we'll have him on our side, right? And we can get him to balance out, the Israel hawks and the lobby in Washington. That obviously hasn't proven to be the case. If anything, Trump and the whole administration is very knee-deep in its relationship with the pro-Israel lobby with AIPAC, right? It is doing everything that AIPAC is asking for it to do. So, and that's even, he's even kind of like ignoring the backlash coming from his own cohort amongst the MAGA crowd who was saying, America first, stop with these wars, stop giving billions to Israel when we need, help at home. He's just going full in with AIPAC. and with the pro-Israel lobby. And we knew that was going to be the case. I mean, the biggest donor to his campaign was Miriam Edelson. I think she gave him about like $100 million, right? So you don't get $100 million from a Zionist and then not fulfill what their wishes are, right? So Netanyahu has Trump in his pocket. It's not the Qataris, it's not the Saudis, it's not the Emiratis. And I think the Gulf states, I hope this attack for them is a wake-up call. They don't have Trump in their pocket, right? Netanyahu has Trump in his pocket. And Trump is going to prioritize Netanyahu and the Israelis over the Qataris, over the Saudis, over the Emiratis, any day of the week. It doesn't matter how many times Yusuf Otaiba, the Emirati ambassador in DC, hosts fabulous luncheons and dinners. It's not going to change anything.
Right.
Trump is going to choose the Israelis first. And that's the eye-opener, I think, that the Qataris and the other Gulf states need to kind of accept here.
I just kind of wanted to get your take about the fact that the Israelis just struck a boat, it seems, docked in Tunisia to try to scare these activists from going to Gaza on the Global Samud flotilla. Isn't it crazy?
Well, it's crazy. And I just saw Francesca Albanese just emphasizing how crazy this is, that this country, which is acting in total impunity and has been for decades, but has accelerated obviously in the last 2 years, where there's nothing and no one holding Israel to account. And they're just pushing the limits because they know no one is going to stop them. So they don't care about international law. We know that already. They don't care about just decency, not even that, but also international norms and conventions, the way countries behave with one another, right? There is just no sense of adherence to any sense of international norms. But I think more telling is that it was another strike on the sovereign territory, the sovereign waters of an Arab country. And I think beyond that, it shows that the Arab world is just in a total state of, if not defeat, utter weakness to allow Israel to just go on and bomb Arab country after Arab country and see no response from the Arab world. I think there's two stories here. One is obviously Israel's total disregard for international laws, which we already know. But the other is the story of the Arab world. Where are they?
Yeah, where are they? And as this horrific genocide in Gaza continues to play out, and you see the lines just get, every line just gets crossed by the Israelis. And now they're, this is basically bombing Tunisian territory. Even if it was directed at this one boat, it's just they're expanding the parameters of their barbarity. And then you see, just to even zoom out even further, you see the Americans now, bombing a boat in the Caribbean.
Right, in Venezuela.
And then, making these threats against Venezuela. And it's the logic of Gaza really playing out globally in a really horrific fashion. And the front line against that was the Arab world, and they failed. They failed miserably. And so there's a lot to unpack and talk about there. And of course, I'm going to focus a bit more on the region that we're both from. We're both Lebanese. We both grew up outside of Lebanon. And so we're diaspora, but we're kind of, we get our foot in both doors, right? So it's like an interesting perspective, I think you and I have.
We grew up overseas. We also spent a lot of time in Lebanon, in the region. So we kind of have our foot, one foot in the West, one foot in our home country. So it's a unique kind of situation to be in, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And, someone else who might try to relate to us is a man called Tom Barrack, who is Trump's special envoy to, I guess, the region at this point. I mean, he started out as, I think, ambassador to Turkey, but he's kind of taken over the position of Amos Hochstein, and Steve Witkoff. I don't know. He's like a blend of the two. He's been the intermediary, if it's like a nice way to call him, between the Israelis and Americans and the Lebanese government. He is of Lebanese descent. And I know it's a bit dated now, but I think it's still worth mentioning. He made this horrific comment towards the Lebanese press literally 2 weeks ago, calling their behavior animalistic and saying that the fact that this region isn't civilized is the problem. Just really, really disgusting, offensive, racist commentary.
Which is insane coming from someone from Lebanese heritage, that he would actually think that way and speak that way.
Yeah, I mean, we have this problem in Lebanon, don't we? There's a certain type of person. But you pointed out that the more outrageous part of his insult was that the Lebanese government I'm quoting you here, the Lebanese government accepted this humiliation and sees itself as inferior to an imperial overlord. Now, obviously, Tom Barrack is a messenger for U.S. and Israeli policy in Lebanon. I was personally happy to see what he said because it really, the mask flipped, right? So many Lebanese have been fawning over this man for so long. So it was good to see some honesty about how these officials actually see us. But yeah, I'm just curious, your general views 2 weeks on from what seems to have kind of passed. Everyone's already forgotten.
Yeah, well, it shouldn't be forgotten because those attempts are still happening, right? So, the Americans still want the Lebanese government to, I guess, facilitate what their wishes are and what the Israelis' wishes are, which is to disarm Hezbollah. And in my post that you referenced, I didn't say disarm Hezbollah. I said disarm Lebanon because that's exactly what the Israelis and the Americans want. They want a Lebanon that is weak. They want a Lebanon that's defenseless. And ironically, when we were talking about the Arab world to start off this show and how weak and kind of like incapable they are of responding to Israel, Lebanon, and to zoom in even further, South Lebanon is, one of those communities in the Arab world that has been resisting and has been putting up the struggle against, I guess, colonization to its south, right? And so what the Israelis and the Americans want is to have Lebanon be like the rest of the Arab world, just sit there passive and allow Israel to dominate and bomb whenever it wants and have no respect or regard for our sovereignty. And I guess the issue that I had with the whole Tom Barak and the Lebanese government response is I'm just like, I'm dumbfounded because I just don't understand how they can't see this. Like, this is not, there's this idea that you can do whatever the Americans want, and your defense strategy is that, maybe Trump will get the Israelis to stop bombing us. That's your defense strategy, to think that Trump will come to your aid. And even if it wasn't Trump, even if it was the Democrats or someone else, like, the idea the Americans are going to put Lebanese interests ahead of Israel's interests. Obviously, I don't know if these Lebanese politicians who are sitting in the government have been around for the last or know Lebanese history for the last 50 years. Like, this is not a policy. This is not how you secure your borders and your prosperity going forward. That's the underlying frustration. It's that this government just seems to have no concept of what Israel is, what Israel has been in a Lebanese context. Let's not forget about the Palestinians for 5 minutes. Just in a Lebanese context, when has Israel ever been benevolent towards Lebanon or sought a desire to partner with Lebanon or help it grow? It's never been the case because that's not what colonizers do. And so fundamentally, there is a lack of understanding, not just in the Lebanese government, but the political parties that are supporting this position and are pushing for this position to disarm Hezbollah and disarm the South, that just seems to not grasp the gravity and the actuality of what Israel represents. It is not here to sit in its tiny corner and be, okay, let's be friends, let's integrate with the rest of the region, let's open our borders, let's have an EU-like economy with the rest of the Arab world. They're not here for that. And they've made that abundantly clear with the genocide in Gaza right now, right? And the genocide that they want to commit in South Lebanon. They have made it abundantly clear they do not see us as equals. We are the human animals. It's come out of their mouth. They don't separate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Lebanese in South Lebanon, the Lebanese in Mount Lebanon. We are all human animals in their eyes. They are here to colonize. They're here to expand. And I'm not saying this as an Indigenous person. I'm taking their words. This is what they're saying. So how do you deal? And so if you're not understanding, if you're not accepting the reality of what we're facing, you're not appreciating the threat that is facing Lebanon. It is not just a few strikes and a few bases in South Lebanon. We are facing an existential threat, right? There are forces in Israel that are growing in power. They're extreme, they're messianic. They want to expand the borders of Israel. That's what they're doing in Gaza right now. That's what they're going to do in West Bank. They're trying to do that in Syria. Why are they not succeeding in South Lebanon? Because there is an armed force there preventing them from doing it. And so if you remove that armed force, they're not going to go away. They're going to keep expanding. So how does this Lebanese government not understand the gravity of what we're facing? It just boggles my mind.
It is shocking, especially because of exactly what you just said. It's like, have you not been watching the last 2 years? I mean, fine, the last 50 some odd, 75 years, but just the last 2 years alone, you see what these people are capable of in Gaza. You see how batshit insane they are. Literally, like these Messianic Zionists who have this greater Israel agenda. And we're supposed to sit here and literally like be okay with giving up the only measure of protection. I won't even call it protection because it's really not enough for protection, but the only measure of deterrence stopping Israel from doing what it does in Gaza or the West Bank in Lebanon, and just take them at their, and actually you're right, take them at their word. It's so funny because I was watching that, I'm going to play a clip from it, but Tom Barrack did this interview with Mario Nawfal, who's a very odd character, who has a show with a variety of guests. I was kind of surprised he went on that program to sort of dispute that he said he didn't mean his animalistic comments in derogatory terms. But I watched the whole interview and he was sitting there saying that Israel does not pose a threat to Lebanon. They are not your enemy. And that you have to trust them. And I'm like, how on earth do you trust people who are intentionally murdering 100 people a day in Gaza and starving them to try to take their land? They're doing it in Syria. Syria doesn't fight back. Like the new Syrian government just lets them, and they're still hitting Syria. And they have made it very clear what they desire in Lebanon, and that is pieces of Lebanon's land. And so, one thing you did right with regard to disarmament is that disarming Hezbollah without a Lebanese-led strategy to replace its arms in the face of the Israeli threat is tantamount to national suicide. And I'm curious if you can expand on that, because I think that in Lebanon, one thing that has been very successful from those who are against any sense of resistance to Israel or imperialism is, they control a lot of media outlets, and they've been able to connect the corruption in Lebanon and the lack of state services, whether it's like electricity or water or just, the inconveniences of daily life here, to Hezbollah's weapons. And these are two different things. Like Hezbollah's weapons are not why we don't have electricity, but they've been able to create that view in people's minds that people here seem to think that, you know what, we're tired. If we just give up these goddamn weapons, maybe I can get electricity. And it's super basic. It's not true, but it's a very powerful argument. So yeah, I'm curious if you can expand on the idea of national suicide, because like you said, people don't understand the gravity of this threat.
Oh, there's two things to unpack there. The first, directly to your question, if we just take Lebanon as a nation state in the world, forget its color, forget its flag, forget everything that makes up Lebanon, just as a nation state. Every nation state in the world has a basic, task at hand, right? And that is to secure its borders and secure the area, the territorial, the geographical area that it governs over for the citizens and people who reside within it, right? So just on that premise alone, this is the responsibility of the Lebanese government and everyone who's in power or has a stake in Lebanese power, right? So, okay, we need to secure our borders. We need to secure our territory. What's our immediate threat? Let's just deal with the facts. What's our immediate threat? We have Israeli jets who fly over our heads. They have been for the last, 50 years, right? We have no control over our skies. We have no control over our waters. Israeli boats can go up and down whenever they want to, and they have in the past repeatedly. We are also getting shelled and bombed in the south and wherever. We've got nothing to shoot them. We've got nothing to stop these attacks from happening. This is the first task of the Lebanese government. You need to find a way to stop Israel or whoever it is violating our sovereignty. You've got to find a way to deal and protect the territory that you're governing, right? And so when I think about a Lebanese-led strategy, I think, okay, well, what do we need? We need anti-air missiles. We need an air defense system. We need an air force. We need a navy. We need a proper state military. Where am I going to get that from? Okay, the Americans give me scraps and handouts. They're never going to give me anything more than that because they're tied to Israel. We know that. We've known that forever. So why are our officials still going to Washington as if they're the only power and player in the world that can, this is not a Lebanese strategy. This is subservience. This is this kind of I'm just swallowing the colonial Kool-Aid there are other powers in the world. When was the last time a Lebanese government sent a delegation to Beijing? You know, there are other powers in the world. You know, the Saudis deal with China. The Emiratis deal with China.
Yeah.
What's stopping us from dealing with China? Why aren't we asking, going around the world, being like, okay, the Americans aren't going to give us anything because they're with Israel. Let's go find someone else to give us anti-air missiles or some kind of anything, right, to help our military grow and expand. Because we need to do that. We're not going anywhere. Our territory is there, and Israel is to our south. We've got to find a way to defend our borders, right? So that's what I think about when I think about a Lebanese-led strategy. Everyone's sitting around answering this simple question: how do we secure our skies? How do we get the Israeli jets out of our skies? And how do we get them stopping bombing? How do we get them to stop bombing us every, second day? It's not via Washington. Okay, so that's what I think about when I think about a Lebanese-led strategy. But to your second point that you're raising with regards to Hezbollah weapons and the corruption and decay of the state, I will make this one note, and I have in the past, that Hezbollah is the kind of the aftermath, the outcome of a state that has already decayed, right? So the Lebanese state collapsed during the civil war. We know that. And post-civil war, we had pretty much a civil war setup. We had factions controlling the little fiefdoms, the little areas, and they all benefited. They all benefited from hollowing out the state in order to maintain their fiefdoms. So the fact that the Lebanese state has just been left to rot is the responsibility of all the sects in Lebanon. I haven't seen a single sect come up being like, oh, let's revive the state, come up with a Lebanese-led strategy for a whole bunch of things, an economic strategy, a defense strategy. No one has come to the table with anything like that. And Hezbollah hasn't done that either. And that's one of my criticisms right now of the new leadership. We know all the leadership's been pretty much wiped out, but the new leadership, okay, if you're obviously opposed to what the Lebanese government is trying to push on you, what's your counter proposal? Like what is your plan for the Lebanese defense, right? Because obviously we're in this limbo, untenable situation. It's obvious that Hezbollah's weapons and capabilities were not enough to deter Israel this time, right? It wasn't enough. And now we've lost the deterrence. That's a reckoning that Hezbollah has to deal with right now. And everyone in Lebanon has to deal with, and we are dealing with it right now. Everyone's aware of that. Okay, so put some ideas forth, because we can't go back to what it was before October 2023. And you have to admit as well, Hezbollah, they have to admit as well that they need to think outside the box with how they're going to secure their communities in the south. It might be the case they're going to have to lean on others in Lebanon and maybe even Syria to try and come up with something to secure all of us, because we're all under attack and we're all getting bombed on a daily basis. The Israelis don't care if you're Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or if you're Hezbollah or if you're Greek Orthodox. They don't care. They don't care. We are just pawns being played by them. And so long as we keep being played and playing against each other, we're just serving their interests.
No, absolutely. And one thing that the Americans have, I'm going to sneeze. Hold on. No, I'm not going to sneeze. One thing that the Americans and the Israelis have done a really good job of is keeping us kind of siloed in our neighborhoods and sects, and so we don't think beyond that, especially in Lebanon, or even to expand it now in Syria, right? Yet you have this existential threat that threatens all of us, just like you said. And I want to play this video it's just a little clip of Tom Barrack giving that interview that I had mentioned, because, and this is important. This is him basically stating, I think, another very honest thing about the situation as it is now. So let's give it a listen.
October 7th, the world for Israel has changed. Their notion of what their mandate is and what our borders and boundaries and lines has changed. So I think it's safe to say in Israel's mind, these lines that were created by Sykes-Picot are meaningless. They will go where they want, when they want, and do what they want to protect the Israelis and their border, to make sure on October 7th never happens again.
I mean, that's basically okay, and one thing I hear people say is we're living in greater Israel times, right? They'll go where they want, when they want, as Tom Barrack said. And again, they're doing it in Palestine. They're doing it in Syria. They're doing it in Lebanon. And, beyond, right? They're constantly bombing Yemen. They bomb a boat on the dock in Tunisia. They attack boats in international waters. It just goes on and on and on. And one thing today that's a little bit different from the past is that, one by one, the Americans and Israelis have managed to subdue one country after another by creating like Palestinian authorities everywhere, whether it's like the Egyptian government normalizing, the Jordanian government. I mean, these governments literally participate and collaborate with the Israelis to help protect them from the consequences of their actions and suppress their own populations who all hate Israel. And the Palestinian Authority, they literally are still collaborating with the Israelis, even as the Israelis are like defunding them. They collaborate with the Israelis to arrest anyone in the West Bank who dares to stand up to Israel. And that is what the Americans and the Israelis are trying to turn the Lebanese army into. And it's so incredibly dangerous because actually explain to our audience why it's so dangerous what the Americans and the Israelis are trying to do. I mean, they seem to be trying to create the conditions for some sort of confrontation between the Lebanese army and Hezbollah. And, you are studying the Lebanese civil war. You're writing a book about it. Explain to us the catastrophe this could cause.
Well, before we get to that, I want to make a point about the Arab world before we get there, because it's really important to understand the context. But also that, for those of us who have been studying the region from the region, this is why listening to Indigenous voices is so important. None of this is a surprise. Not even the genocide is a surprise, really, when you think about it, because it's the culmination of what the Americans and the Israelis have been trying to achieve pretty much since 1948, right? So you said it before, the Americans and the Israelis have worked to knock out any Indigenous voice in the region that prioritizes, that is all about self-determination, authentic self-determination, and not having an American presence in the region, but having our own voice on the global stage. It pacified Egypt after Gamal Abdel Nasser, knocked out Iraq, knocked out Libya, knocked out Syria. Now, you can say what you want about all these regimes. They all had their problems, obviously. None of them were angels. But they all had a foreign policy that was opposed to American hegemony of the region and, by extension, Israel and their existence on our indigenous lands. They've all been knocked out. And even beyond that, they've worked to suppress every movement that may have challenged this order that they've built. And that goes for nationalists and secular nationalists. Abdel Nasser was a secular nationalist, as well as Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, in Egypt and throughout where they're repressed, like in Jordan. Now, the elites that are in charge of the Arab world right now, the Gulf states, the Gulf royal families, the Sisi regime, the Hashemites in Jordan, they have all benefited from colonialism. They have all seen their power. They've got their power. First, Sisi aside, but the rest of them, the Gulf Arab monarchies and the Jordanian King Abdullah and Hashemite family, all got their power from the British, right? And the Americans just inherited that. And the Americans have just continued that relationship. This is a century-long imperial subjugation of the Arab world through the imposition and the empowerment of these various families. And it just so happened that the Gulf countries struck gold and sat on oil, and now they're funding everything around the world. So, it's the order, and this is why it's really important for everyone to understand the context here. The Arab world today, the occupation is not just Palestine. The entire Arab world is in some form or another under American subjugation, because they have these regimes in power. They have empowered these regimes ever since. And these regimes serve the American agenda, not in necessarily a subservient way, but in a kind of like a mutual beneficial way, right? They've got power and prestige by aligning themselves with the Americans, and they want to protect that at all costs, right? And that's why they don't care about Palestine. They don't care about Lebanon. They don't even care about their own countries. Look at Egypt, for goodness sake. It could be a powerhouse. Its people are wallowing in poverty, right? It's heavily indebted. It could be a completely different story. These regimes only, and look at Jordan. It exists on foreign aid. It's not producing anything. Like, these countries are letting the Arab world rot and decay. And so this is the context that everyone needs to understand, right? This is not out of the blue what Israel is doing right now. Israel and the Americans have knocked out every opponent to the Israelis in the region, bar Iran. But Iran's a lot further than Syria and Egypt and Iraq. Iran can't stop Israel from expanding into the Levant or even into the Sinai if it wants to. So it's Israel succeeded. Israel succeeded in knocking everyone out with the help of the Americans around them. And so coming to Lebanon now, as we were discussing before, this is kind of like the last leg of resistance against the Israeli project in our native lands. And what they're proposing, I tie Lebanon to Syria, right? So Israel has made, no secrets that after the downfall of Bashar al-Assad, what they want in Syria is a Syria that's divided into different sectarian cantons. And, the French wanted to do this 100 years ago. The French didn't want a Syrian Arab Republic. They wanted to split Syria, current-day Syria, up into various mini Lebanons. They had a state for the Maronites in Lebanon. They wanted a state for the Alawites, a state for the Druze in Sweda, and so forth and so forth. The Syrian people at the time resisted, led by the Druze in Sweda. They were like, no way, we are not splitting up. We are Arab. We are going to stand together. We're going to reject this imperial design to split us up, divide and conquer, which is why it's so laughable now that the Druze in Sweden are like, oh, let's secede. Like, have you forgotten your roots? Anyway, so...
I mean, the guy in charge of Syria called himself Mohammed al-Jolani from the Jolan, and he's like ready to hand it over to the Israelis. Syria is just like one piece of irony all at once, and there's the worst way imaginable at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. But Lebanon and Syria, are in the same bucket here as far as the Israelis are concerned. They want to split it all up and have all of them fight each other, right? And it's divide and conquer. It's like, how many times in history have we seen this movie? And it's like, and not only have we seen this movie,
not even like long ago, like recently,
right? We got played. We have been played before. Our parents got played. It's our people we can talk to about it, and they'll tell us stories about it. And we're reliving this again. Like, it's just, I can't understand. I can't understand why there's no vision coming out from either Lebanon or Syria that is just aware of the pit that we're all falling into.
I think you spoke to some of it. I mean, no, this isn't the only reason, but if you spend decade after decade after decade killing the people who have a vision, right? Like, whatever vision that may be, the secularists, the Islamists, the leftists, like one after another, it's like, what are you left with? You're left with the sectarian overlords. You're left with Al-Qaeda running Syria. It's like you're left with people in Sweden being like, yeah, let's go live under Israeli rule. Like, you're left with people in Lebanon wanting to literally defang their own country with zero measure of protection. And I think there's another really good point you made in one of your posts. And that was that, for the last 25, 30 years, it's, at the forefront of antagonism towards Israel has been non-state actors. And what we've learned in the last couple of years is that non-state actors are not powerful enough to deter Israel. And, whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon, whether it's Hamas, in whatever's left of Hamas in Gaza, whether it's, the Houthis run a huge portion of the Yemeni state, but, I don't know, a lot of people still consider them non-state actors. But you know what? One of the reasons they're the most capable, I would say, is because they run the mechanisms of a state. But even then it's not enough because it's a very weak state, obviously. But all that's to say, like, and even Iran as a country, despite being able to pose the biggest threat materially when Israel tried to confront them, still quite weak, right? I mean, they're only capable of so much. So all that's to say, it is really sad that you don't see anybody pushing a vision for any sort of unified state confronting the Israelis. And instead, I go back to, I guess my original point is the Americans have captured every state in the region and made them subservient to American interests, which means the first priority is to suppress and disarm their own people so that their people don't pose a threat to the Israelis and American interests in the region.
It's not just that, though. It's not just that. They haven't just broken the states, think about it this, 30, 40 years ago, it was called the Arab-Israeli conflict. And then they turned it into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They have diluted this sense of a common identity that binds people together, and we're seeing that play out now in Syria, right? Like it's, you've got the Druze community in Sweden, and it's so important to talk about this because this community was like the heart of Arab nationalism in the 1920s, right? It led the Arab revolt. It didn't lead a Druze revolt. It led an Arab revolt. This is a tiny minority in a country that's, in a greater Syria that's, mostly Sunni Muslim, who were like, no, we're going to reject imperialism. We're going to reject colonialism, and we're going to rise up and we're going to defend the territorial integrity of whatever's left of what's been carved out, right? So to go 100 years, so what's that? A great-grandparent away, and have their offspring today reject all sense of Arab commonality, Syrian commonality, and emphasize not even the Druze identity. They're rejecting the Druze they're at odds with Jumblat now. Like they just want their own little thing in Sweden. It's like, what's happened? And so this has happened across the region. It's the Israelis and the Americans have deliberately tried to dilute any sense of anything that ties the Arab world together, to have people feeling like a sense that they belong and that Palestine is like a core issue for them. And like when you read through the text, when you read through the media, when you read through the politics of like the 1940s, 1930s, 1950s, everyone, all the intellectuals of the Arab world, from Baghdad to Cairo to from Beirut to Damascus, everyone was writing about Palestine as if it was our territory that we were losing, right? Everyone felt a sense of attachment to Palestine because there was a sense of a common Arab ummah, Fast forward to now, and it's almost like we've all been sucked into these colonial boundaries that we've been given. But beyond that, now they want to fragment them even further. So it's like we're returning to like this tribalism that the Americans and the Israelis have wanted us to return to, so we can be fragmented and not have this sense of an Arabness that might tie an Egyptian and a Lebanese and a Syrian together, and also tie them all to Palestine. And in doing so, they've isolated the Palestinians, and they have for the last 30 years, and they've just accelerated their oppression and their colonial expansion of Palestine, because on the one hand, they've, as I said, diluted that Arab identity, and on the other hand, they've isolated the Palestinians and crushed them even more. So that's what they've done. Let's
bring it to Syria for a moment, because I think that's been probably, in the most catastrophic to see Syria, which always had a strong identity, right, as like Syrians and like that sort of Arab sort of nationalism behind them, regardless of the many things that were wrong with Syria. And I have family in Sweden, and they were never particularly fond of Baathism or the Assad family, but when the uprising in Syria happened, and then was quickly militarized from all ends, and then you have the entrance of Al-Qaeda, they felt really scared existentially about the prospect of having to potentially be killed by people who see them as like killable because they're Druze, right? And so they were like, no, of course we're going to support the government to stay in power. But interestingly enough, like over the last few years, there was actually protests in Sweden against the government because things got so bad in Syria. And now you have Ahmed al-Shaddad in charge, and you do have these massacres taking place, right? First on the coast against Alawites, which a lot of people not a lot of people, but internationally was kind of like dismissed as whatever, because there was a very good campaign to blame this all on Assad remnants, right? But you can't really make that same excuse when it comes to Sweden. And so now, there's, I haven't polled people. I don't know what the majority of people in Sweden think. I would like to think the majority are not for the idea of like living under the Israelis or anything like that. But increasingly, like I do hear like, yeah, we don't want to live under this government, right? Because they're killing us. They're literally coming and
Right.
kicking us out of our houses and killing us. And it's just a really sad state of affairs. It doesn't justify, wanting to cantonize the region further or like wanting exclusivist little areas by sect, but the conditions have been created for that. And you're going to see the Kurds, the Kurdish movement dig in their heels even further after seeing this happen. It just kind of, justifies. And then even in Lebanon, people are scared because of what's happening in Syria. They're like terrified. Right. And then you've got Lebanese versus Syrian and everybody being scared of the Syrians and on and on and on. It just doesn't end. So I guess all that's a segue for me to ask you with regard to Syria. I saw that you had made a video talking about, how in Syria, these al-Qaeda figures are now in power, talking about normalization with Israel, massacring minorities, on and on and on. And then talking about how there needs to be an alternative to Ahmed al-Sharaa, which I 100% agree with. But, I don't really see that taking place. But yeah, give me your report card on him so far. What are your thoughts on what's transpired in Syria since he's taken over?
Look, when he took over, and I copped a bit of flack for this, when he took over, I was like, you know what, he's saying the right things. He's talking about unity, keeping, respecting minorities, doing a national dialogue, pathway to democracy, all the lovely things that they always say in the first 5 minutes. And like, let's just wait. I judge people by their actions. So he's only been in power for 5 minutes. Everyone wait. And I was criticized for that. Oh, what? What do you mean? He's like Al-Qaeda. I'm like, okay, he may have been Al-Qaeda. Let's just see what happens. And then it only took him 2 months to start massacring Alawites on the coast. So, and even before that, we were getting, reports of incidents occurring with regards to minorities, Christians and so forth, as well as Alawite and Druze. But, it's beyond this. And I always want to tie things back to colonialism because we can't lose sight of the context, right? What is Al-Qaeda? What is this strand of extreme Sunni Islam that has just, contaminated the Islamic world for the last 30 odd years, especially after 9/11 or after the war in Afghanistan in the 1980s with the Soviet invasion, right? Where did this all come from, right? It comes from this Wahhabi, Salafi line, puritanical, extreme version of Islam that has its roots, obviously, in the interior of Arabia, which is now Saudi Arabia. And I think it's important for viewers to know this fact, right? This isn't the first time this puritanical movement arose in the Islamic world. The first Saudi state in the 18th century and the 19th century rose with this alliance between these puritanical these puritanical extremists and the Saudi clan. They came together and they built a state. They were allies. And some of the initial acts in Arabia was the desecration and the destruction of Islamic tombs, sacred Islamic shrines, because they thought that this is not Islam. We've got to go back to the Quran. They remind me of the evangelicals. You know how the evangelicals are like, forget church, just follow the Bible. It's that kind of puritanical thinking. Yeah. Except they use violence. Also to the evangelicals, just on a mass scale. So it's that puritanical thinking. They desecrated holy shrines in the holy sites in Arabia. And who crushed them? Who got rid of them? It was the Sunni world. The Ottomans and the Egyptians sent a force into Arabia, crushed these Wahhabis, and said, you guys are insane. Enough. You're gone. The Sunni world revolted against it because the Sunni world thought these guys were extreme. These guys were insane, and they were completely incompatible with the Sunni Islam of the Ottoman Empire, the Sunni Islam that was in Damascus and Aleppo and Cairo, and all those teachings that came out of those areas and the schools, the Islamic schools in those areas, which was more tolerant and not as puritanical and extreme as the Wahhabis, right? How did these guys come back after the Islamic world repelled them? They came back with the British, because when the British empowered the Saudis and allowed the Saudis to conquer the interior, and as well as the Hijaz and the holy sites, Mecca and Medina, the Wahhabis went with them. And then they found oil. And then they got flooded with money. and they were able to fund movements and mosques and schools all over the world. That's how this extreme puritanical strain of Sunni Islam that was rejected by the Sunni world 2 and a bit centuries ago has been able to spread. It was able to spread indirectly due to the British resuscitating their allies in Arabia, right? So this is why I always tie it to imperialism and colonialism. Like, this is not, it's not like these things just spring up out of nowhere.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear the rest, you can access it by becoming a Breakthrough News member at patreon.com/breakthroughnews.